Welcome to Artists Now. Welcome to all my students and to everyone in the campus community who is attending this free and public lecture, and anyone from beyond. So please always feel free to join us whenever we have a Artists Now lecture. Especially, it's always great to see students who graduated from Media Bayonne come back and check out this program. We will always welcome you back, and I was excited to see you. So tonight we have a visiting artist. We have two more. Chris will introduce our guests in a second, but join us for the next 2 weeks. Next Wednesday we have Keel Johnson, which I'm already seeing some work go up and some hype about that lecture. So please join us next Wednesday. And then 2 weeks from today we have Christiane Patterson, which will close out our visiting artists program. We still have a couple more classes in my class till the end of the semester, but then we start right up again in the spring with a slate of about 9 more guests, and we are reviewing proposals for the following year. So things roll on in this post-mortem day after Day of Red. Day of Dead. So at any rate, one positive news is I think tonight's guests are going to be fantastic. I've been really intrigued by seeing the work. Chris Willey's guest, how many people have studied with Chris here? We all know he is an unbelievably fantastic instructor. Why? Because I hear that from every student on a daily basis. So great pleasure to introduce Chris Willey, who will introduce our guest tonight.
Thank you, everybody. I'm excited to have the pleasure of introducing my friend and mentor. J.D. Beltran is a curator, professor, artist, filmmaker, writer, and public art administrator. I'm reading this because I'm nervous I'll forget something. She teaches at San Francisco Art Institute and is the president of the San Francisco Arts Commission. Her work has been screened and exhibited widely in the United States. Some examples are the MIT Media Lab in New York City, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and the SF MoMA, to name a few. Internationally, she's had tremendous experiences as well, and by that I mean exhibitions, biennials, and other screenings in Canada, Russia, China, Kyrgyzstan, again, to name a few. Recently I heard a podcast by Radiolab about translation, and it struck me that this is exactly what JD is actively doing in her art practice. While her work is technologically involved, much of that flash is hidden. What we're left with is JD's pure voice. She visually reconstructs narratives and then puts these experiences into our society. The hundreds of decisions she makes within each body of work is another form of interpreting her stories for you, the audience. Now, please join me in welcoming JD.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I am absolutely delighted to be here. And the first thing I want to do is follow suit of the prior two speakers, except for Christopher, and brag about Christopher. And that is that he is also not only a fantastic professor, but was one of the most talented and gifted graduate students that I had the pleasure of working with. And I actually visited his class today and told this story that when I first met him, and I remember this moment as I was coming off the plane last night, got to meet him for the first time in about 5 years. When I first met him, it was at a portfolio day in the Chicago Art Institute. And I remember he was kind of wandering around trying to figure out where at the San Francisco Art Institute he should go in terms of our table and who to talk to. And I came by and I said, "Is anybody here for new genres?" And he told me later he had no idea what new genres was, but he said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll go over there." And I was the person who was actually interviewing graduate students for new genres. And I explained at the San Francisco Art Institute in the 70s, we started a program which was originally called Performance Video because it didn't fit neatly into any of those categories of painting, printmaking, sculpture, photography. And New Genres was based in concept. It was based on conceptual art, where you would start with a concept and then you would manifest your concept through material or through performance. And that is exactly what he has always done. He just confessed to me earlier that he went to undergrad as a drawing student, but never really drew. And actually instead experimented in other medias, in sculpture and in installation. And so he was a natural for New Genres. And then the second pleasure I had was, at that time, since I was assessing the quality of our New Genres entering class at the San Francisco Institute, I also got to award scholarships. And he was so talented that our school, with my recommendation, gave him a full scholarship to the San Francisco Institute, which amounted to about $68,000. So I had the pleasure of calling him, telling him, not only did you pick the right program, New Genres, but you get to come here free. And now I see he's an enormously successful and popular teacher, and I have the pleasure of sitting through one of his classes. And for me, as a teacher and as one of his mentors, that gives me enormous satisfaction as well. So the other thing that was nice was coming back and talking to him as a peer last night, and staying up till 1:30 at an Irish bar, and getting drunk, and talking about our process. I understand that the PET program paid for that year. Yeah. And during this discussion, we started talking about how we both teach, and in terms of what we stress, how we try to steer and guide and instruct our students and mentor our students into a way of making art, their way of making art. And so I had actually had this whole talk prepared on my work, but then after this really great conversation last night, I thought, I've never really deconstructed my process. And I think maybe that would be useful. It was useful not only for me this morning at breakfast doing it, but also it probably would be useful for you, just because I noticed that in the poster it said she is going to talk about every artist's greatest challenge to create a seamless and invisible conjunction of concept, material, execution, and process to produce a result that both engages and leaves an indelible impression with the viewer. And I'm like, wow, did I write that? I guess I must have. And so I should talk about it. So when I first got my MFA, I also was very fortunate to have two incredibly strong mentors in New Genres. One was Doug Hall, one was Paul Koss, and one was John Roloff, who Christopher Willie also studied with. And so I started thinking about what they taught me, and I started jotting these things down. So this is my PowerPoint font from my sketchbook. And the first thing that I remember having as a slogan was to be fearless. And I remember actually having that as a screensaver, so that whenever I walked into my studio, I would see it floating, doing that floating "Be Fearless" text on my screen. And it was like this mantra, like, don't be afraid to take risks, to try things. And over the years, it's been tempered. I am a little fearless now, not hugely fearless, and I think that just comes from being in the art world longer and realizing that you have to take risks, but you can't take, not very smart risks. So that's tempered with be smart, and don't be stupid. Because I've seen a lot of artists actually sort of be fearless, but then be stupid, and that doesn't work. And then, over the last several years, something that to me is just as important as being fearless is being relevant. And what that means is to be thinking about how is what you're doing and what you're making relevant to the field in which we're working, to the conversation which we're having around the medium that you're working in. How is it relevant? And I'll go into that a little bit more. And then, the other thing that I was always taught was to figure out, what do I need to get there? And what this relates to is the fact that I had this really seminal critique in grad school where I was told essentially that I was a failure. And that ended up being the most important critique in terms of my concept and my practice. And it's because I was a painter, and it's not to say that those of you who are painters out there are failures, but because I started out as a painter, And I ended up doing nothing but painting portraits in a way that I thought was really novel and interesting. And it took one of my critiques, in fact, one of our joint sculpture professors, John Roloff, a critique where he said, I don't understand why you're even painting. And to have someone say that to you as a graduate student when you've been doing nothing but painting your entire life was just devastating. And it wasn't because I wasn't a good painter. It was because he couldn't see from what I was painting why I was doing it to add to any conversation that hadn't already been had before about the nature of painting and the nature of representation. I was painting portraits. And so we got into this long discussion, and he said, well, if you're going to be doing portraits, particularly a self-portrait, which I had done, why don't you just do a bunch of bookshelves with the books that you're interested in? That to me is so much more interesting than looking at a painted portrait of what your face looks like. And I started to think about that, and he was right. I mean, it's like people could see that maybe I was a great realist painter and I could very accurately paint the features of my face, but would that be nearly as interesting as, basically looking at my bookshelf to see what kind of books I read and to see that mix? And then I started to think about why I was doing what I was doing, and it took that critique to point out to me that it was because I was interested in the nature of representation. I wasn't necessarily interested in paint or in painted portrait, but I was interested in how I could innovatively represent people. So, what do I need to get there? Everything that you are using, from your paint to your paintbrush to your After Effects to your Illustrator to your cell phone to your gazing out the window as you're taking the bus, is a tool. And I think that was one of the most important things that I learned from my mentors, is that conceptually you shouldn't be dividing, this is my artist job and persona and practice, and this is my personal life, because those two are seamless. And everything you do is a tool. And everything is useful as a tool to inform your work, because you are the inventor. And in order to invent and create what you want to create as an artist, you need to figure out what tools that you need to make what you want to make happen. Okay, so the other thing that came to me, and you'll see this in my work, is that everything is a material. Same thing. Even, in this afternoon's class, I said, making spaghetti for dinner, that's material. You may not think of it as material, but the way that you do it, your process, and what influences, how much pepper or tomato sauce to put in, that's part of you and your concept of how to make something. And that goes into how you make your art. And so, if you go away with anything from the lecture, I would probably appreciate that you start to think of all aspects of your life, and not just what you think of as your artist materials and tools as material. And then what is your material going to do in terms of what you want it to do? Your method is also material, and that includes your labor, that includes your time, and that includes the experience you create, as well as the story that you tell with your artwork. And all of that is part of the material that goes into what you do. So then I decided to try deconstructing this hierarchy of how I have thought as an artist, how my mentors taught me to think as an artist, and how I now mentor other students to think as artists. I start with concept. And you notice I didn't say I start with film, or I start with painting, or I start with, my camera. You start with your ideas and how you execute them, even though you might think of yourselves as a painter, as a photographer. How you make your work is what makes you an artist. And the material you use to make it with is just that. It's just a material. So then the second thing to think of when I think, after you think of what your concept is, or what after I do, is how is my concept relevant? We had this discussion this afternoon about, does it add to the conversation? What if somebody did it before? Is that bad? Is it bad for you to copy somebody? Well, and we came to the conclusion that it wasn't. If what you're doing augments it or adds to it or has a different take on it, that continues to add to the conversation. And then your oeuvre. I had to look on YouTube in terms of how to pronounce this, and I think I'm still pronouncing it wrong. But this is what I was talking about in terms of your making spaghetti. There's something about the way that you do the things that you do that is going to be subconsciously and consciously in everything you do, including your work. And a lot of you may think, well, I can't do it this way because that's not my signature style. Or I'm not going to do it in that material because I'm not, I don't do things in black and white. Or I don't have that color palette as part of my palette. All that decision making that you're making in your mind before you even make something is part of your and part of your aesthetic. And so you shouldn't have to consciously think of if something is going to look like, a J.D. Beltran or a Christopher Willard, because it's going to come out in the way that you make it. And then decide what material that you're going to make it in. And many of you think of yourselves as primarily focusing on one material or a couple of them. But I would encourage you to really rethink why you're using that material. And then the last thing, and I think this is a really important question. If you make it, they will come. Because you're going to be putting a lot of your time, energy, heart, and labor into that artwork that you make. And you need to be able to be confident that if you make it, they will come, meaning your audience. Okay, will they? So that's a question that I always have in my mind when I'm making something. Am I making this interesting enough? Is this an innovative enough idea? Is this aesthetically beautiful? Does this have the craftsmanship? Does this have the color palette? Does this engage someone in a way that they won't come? And that they won't walk by the gallery where this piece is sitting, glance at it, and not give it a second look. And then I think, why would anybody want to be engaged in that piece of work that I'm making? What's going to make them come? So these are the questions and issues that I look at. Okay, let's start with concept. Whenever I critique somebody in a studio visit, the first thing I ask is, what are you trying to do? It's a really important question. It's not, what have you done? Or look what you've done here. It's, what are you trying to do? Sometimes that means stepping even away from what I'm looking at and trying to figure out the motivation of the artist for why they're making it in the first place. What's the idea behind it? What story they're trying to tell? Why is that story important to me? And I think you, as artists, you need to be consciously aware of that motivation, because that's what's going to drive your passion, and that's what's going to make the work stronger. If you're consciously aware of what you're trying to do. As artists, we have natural curiosity. One of my favorite quotes was from Lisa Liu, who's this amazing artist who beads every surface of these sculptures that she does. And she even got carpal tunnel syndrome because she was doing so much beading. So now she now has this group of people who does it for her. And they got, and one of the questions asked in an interview was, why are you spending all of this time and injuring your body just to be able to bead these crazy environments? And her answer was, I just wanted to see what it looked like. And I thought that was so beautiful, because as artists, that's what we're privileged to be able to give as our rationale. And much of the art we look at because no one would have thought of doing it that way, but that artist did, and they just wanted to see what it looked like. And I think that's one of the most beautiful concepts that artists are privileged to be able to experience. Relevance. Is this adding to the conversation? And that would be my greatest criticism, just as I was criticized when I was painting portraits, whether what I was doing was really adding to the conversation of painting. And when realizing if it was, fantastic, because it's some different take, it's some different look, it's some different style or aesthetic. But if it wasn't, then what do I need to do to make it relevant? Has no one you know at least tried doing what you're doing? And I think as artists, that's sort of our homework. You need to, before you try, and many of you are looking at the people who have influenced you, who've done something similar to you. But if someone's already done what they're doing, how are you adding to that conversation or making relevant work in a way that people are going to want to look at it? And then if someone has done it, can you do it better or differently? And how and why is it better? So these are the questions that I always ask. I see a lot of young artists who are devastated when I point out, oh yeah, you should look at this artist, they did something exactly like that. And that happens all the time. That's the fate, our fate of postmodernism, where nothing is original and everything is derivative in some way of something that's already been done. But that doesn't mean it can't be done better. And then you got it. And this comes out of your subconscious, it comes out of your intuition, and it comes out in your aesthetic, the way that you make your space. So then, your material. What material are you going to use? Many of you already, again, are used to working in a particular kind of material. I would encourage you to think why you're making that material, and if it really is the appropriate material for your idea or your concept. Why your choice? Because it's cool. I mean, that's a fine answer to why why you would choose a certain material, and you're privileged to do that. In fact, some of the most brilliant artwork I've seen is from the most unexpected material, and the artist wanted to use that material just because it's cool. I mean, think about the giant dog in New York by Jack Koons that was covered with plants, right? Or even Anish Kapoor's amazing mirrored jelly bean. It's cool. Why would you think about doing that just because it's cool? And it works. But also, when you're choosing a material, think about the semiotics of that material. Why did Anish Kapoor choose that highly reflective, highly expensive, it was a $25 million sculpture, reflective aluminum or metal to use as a surface finish of Cloudgate, which is the name of that sculpture, which they call the beam. And it was because it reflected the landscape. It's because it acted kind of like this very otherworldly funhouse mirror, but it also referenced and was interactive to the people around it, because when you walked up to it and when you saw it, you were reflected in that landscape, so it immediately becomes a self-portrait. And it's brilliant. It's actually known as the most brilliant and most successful piece of public art in the world. It attracts over $65 million of revenue in terms of tourist revenue of people who come there just to see that piece of public art, which is, a home run. So when you're thinking about your materials, dig deep. What's the history of your material and its nature of representation? How have people used it or misused it to do what you expect it to do? And how does it create meaning or experience? When I say create meaning, many of you are making work that isn't narrative, isn't literal, but is more abstract and is more about evoking an emotion or a sensation. So how does it create that sensation or emotion or experience? And then how will you use it as an artist? And will it do the work that you want it to do? One of my mentors framed it in a nice way, Doug Hall. He said that it's the artist's job to problematize the work, meaning we're problem solvers. We have a material, we have a concept. How do I solve the problem of combining that material and concept to do the work that I want it to do? You make it come. And then last, I think as you're making your work, I've gone through many projects where halfway through I'm like, this really sucks. I'll look at it, or else I'll have someone come in and say, what are you doing? And then I'll realize, hey, I had this great idea, but it's a failure. And I think as artists, we all need to be aware that that's going to happen. Art making is not linear, and you should always be willing to accept those failures and even the happy accidents that happen, because they'll lead you to the successes that will continue to inform your work. And then the last thing that I can't control this, because everybody's going to come to my artwork or any artwork with a particular perspective, a particular experience that they bring to it. But I try to think about what someone will remember. When they walk away from my work, what do I want them to remember? Okay, so I am now going to go into my own work. So one of the first pieces that I did out of grad school was actually an interactive piece with the MIT Media Lab. It was called Telephone Story. And once I got that drubbing of a critique, I turned toward still making portraits, but thinking about a way that was very different. And that's what Telephone Story was about. One day, and this is what I mean when I say, you know, your life is your art. I came home and my message machine was full, and it couldn't collect the messages. And this is before 9/11, so this is before that phenomenon of people realizing how powerful your phone messages can be. But what I decided to do was just listen to all of them so I could delete the ones, you know, I would save all of my messages, and so I could delete the ones that weren't relevant and see if I would have any more room left on my voice recorder. And my recording tape was about 25 minutes, and I sat there for 25 minutes and listened to the entire set of messages and realized that that told such an interesting story about me. It was a much more interesting self-portrait to listen to the messages of people who called me and what they called me about, rather than a painted portrait. And that's what telling one story was. So what I did was, I was actually quite honored to be part of this major exhibition, and I'll just play a little bit of the which traveled for 2 years and all over the country, including at MIT and in the kitchen in New York. I had all these graduate students doing the coding for me to do this, so that was great. And so I had an interface here, which was my desk. Now, granted, this was in 2000 when this was made.
Okay. On Monday night, it's 9:15 my time. Begins the rest of the night. If you get give me a call, I'd love to catch up. Bye.
Hey JD, it's Chris. Hope you're doing well. I'm going to Houston at the moment, but I wanted to call and say hello. And I'll give you a call later, okay? I'd love to find out how you're doing and catch up on your painting. The thing in LA was awesome. This film went over very, very well, and it was cool. I'll give you a call later, and I hope you're having a great day. Bye-bye.
Hey, honey bunny girl, this is Lance. It's a beautiful, hot Thursday morning, and was just thinking about you and calling to say hi. Hope you're feeling better. I got hit by a horrible intestinal flu last week, and was not starting up the camper, but I'm feeling much better.
Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. I just want to call and see how are you doing. Where are you? I don't know where you are. And but anyway, I love you, and I just wanted to let you know how things are doing. You'll be okay, okay? Love you. It's Mom. I'll be in and out of the house. So if you call, I will not be there when you. Today is Friday, but if you call tomorrow morning, I will be here until 9 o'clock, kind of all the time. Okay? Love you. Bye. Have a nice weekend, sweetheart. Bye, Mom.
And her message is like a letter.
Hi, Judy. This is Mom. This just sounds like you have a bad cold. Did you get my message last Friday? And did you get the package? If you do, I am home right now because it is raining. So I would like to go walking this morning. I will walk this afternoon. So you can call me, okay, and discuss what I have left for you, message in the phone. Okay, sweetheart, I hope everything's okay. I'll see you soon and talk to you soon. Bye.
So this is
Hi,
actually,
Judy, Mom. I just got home and I saw that you called at about 1 o'clock, and it's 3 o'clock now. I had to do my shopping and going around on Friday. But anyway, I'll be home. If you call me, I will be home from now on, okay? I love you. Okay, bye. Love you, Mom.
so that's actually a time-lapse view of the view from my studio. And the nice thing is that ended up being a very successful piece. And to me, personally, as well as to a lot of viewers who didn't even know me, a much more interesting self-portrait than if they were to see a painted representation of my face. So about the same time, I started the Secrets Project, just because, as I said, wouldn't that be cool if I could see what happened in terms of collecting people's secrets that they would never tell anyone else in their life, but they would tell a stranger. And now I understand there's a phone app that does the same thing. This was like in 2003. So with the Secrets Project, what I did was I actually put out a call on the internet, and I did it by actually putting them on, putting this call out to dating sites and to Craigslist, saying essentially, very simply, send me your secret, and I'm doing an art project. You don't have to tell me who you are, and I'm not going to contact you. And you can even send it from an anonymous email. But I want you to send me a secret that you believe defines you as a person. So it's what I call anonymous portraits, something that people sort of had in their subconscious or conscious that affected them every day because of the nature of the secret. And so, that was the very first secret I got. So stills from this series, and I collected hundreds of secrets, ended up being photographic pieces in and of themselves. And so what I would do is I would actually, these were about 17 inches by 12 inches, and I would have stills from the video mounted on aluminum as photographs. With some of the key phrases. And then this installation was commissioned for the Zero One Media Festival in San Jose in 2006. And what I did was I actually installed these tiny little LCD screens where the films of the secrets underneath the salt chambers, so that when people went to the cafe and used the salt, they would literally discover people's secrets hidden underneath the salt and pepper. And so these are people viewing the secrets of the cafe. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is the Magic Story Table, and this, as you can see, has been commissioned all over the world. And it also received an annual Design Review Award from ID Magazine. And what it is it's a technology that was actually invented by my partner, Scott Miniman, who does a lot of the technology-based side of what we do. He does the hardware, he's an inventor, he has an undergraduate in architecture and a master's, both in mechanical engineering and computer science from MIT. And then he's got a PhD from Stanford in design and computer science. So, you know, essentially he can make anything, which is a great collaborator. And so he actually invented this interactive table, and it uses a similar database such as Google Earth. It actually uses Bing, which is from Microsoft. But instead of having to use a mouse and have this sort of clunky navigation, it's very seamless in the sense that you can literally fly using the surface of this table that's on a gimbal, that you can twist and spin and tilt to get to where you want to in the world. And what we did was we actually mapped it with stories that occurred at these different places in the world. So what you're about to see is a set of stories that was commissioned by the San Francisco Arts Commission from high schoolers in the San Francisco Bay Area. So as you tilt the table, you can see what area you want, and then you can zoom in. This was at the Pirates store in Mission in San Francisco, and so we actually put these scavenger hunt X's, like Pirates map, onto where the stories occurred. And we asked the high schoolers to write what the most important moments of their lives were. And then when you focused in on a story, you would actually hear that high schooler telling their story in their own voice. And there was an animation that you could scroll through by turning.
In fact, I can't remember whether I sleep or not. I wake up looking around and then go back to sleep. I wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and say, I can't go back to sleep. So I get up and take a shower. After I'm done, I just go outside with my dog, look around, take him for a walk, and then I don't know. I can't remember. All I remember.
You can't really hear it that well. When you're done, the story disappears and then you zoom back out. So that's why we call it the magic story. You can see all the other stories in the San Francisco area. So this table has been all over the world, as I said. Here it was in Cleveland, where we were invited for the Cleveland Ingenuity Fest, and we usually start these projects about 3 months ahead of time in order to collect stories from the local inhabitants, and they end up being this portrait, essentially, of that city through the stories of the inhabitants. This is in St. Petersburg in Russia, where Scott is actually one of the storytellers is pointing the exact location on the projected map of where her story occurred, and Scott's writing down the coordinates, the longitude and the latitude. And this is also in St. Petersburg. This sort of shows you how, it's a really intuitive interactive sculpture, and so kids love to play with this table and spin it and travel all over and find where they live, find where they go to school. The table itself is also really robust. It's actually been installed as a simple map table without stories all over the world. And Scott told me that when he's walked into some of the museums where he's installed this, he's seen kids lying on top of the table while they spin it around like a statue. Here it is in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, with a set of school kids who are reading a particular story. When we go to other countries, we actually put the stories in the text in their language. So this is all done in Cyrillic, which is essentially what's read in Kyrgyzstan and in Russia. And then we actually record the stories by the storyteller in their native language as well. So the next project I'm super excited to talk about. Today, or last night, as I was flying over here to give this talk, my partner Scott, who's not only my collaborative partner, but my partner in life, was flying to Ghent, Belgium, where we have been awarded the Technological Art Award as one of the top art and technology artworks worldwide for 2014 with our Cinema Snowglobe. So he and I have both been completely enamored of the nostalgic form of the snow globe. And when I talked earlier about how everything is a material, the form of the snow globe is a material. So when you think of a snow globe, you automatically think of, you know, a journey, a memento, nostalgia, a souvenir, someplace special that you want to remember, and therefore you bought a snow globe that has the little, you know, inscription of the city or the monument of where you visited. And so you can literally, it's the analog virtual experience. You can kind of travel back when you see that snow globe and see Mount Rushmore. And so I've been making snow globes since grad school, and Scott has been making custom snow globes since he was in high school. So we both decided that we really wanted to do a time-based snow globe, and that's when we undertook this endeavor to make basically a snow globe that would have film and would have a moving image. So, here's what it looks like. So this is all done we first started it in earnest in 2012, and essentially what we did was we sourced out a tiny little OLED screen, and there's only one place that makes it in the world. It's actually in Australia, because it was supposed to be a specific size. It was really important to us, and this was part of what I was talking about the material and the concept, to have it feel and look the same scale as the kind of snow globes that you buy at the souvenir shop. And so it's 2 inches. It's the same scale.
So here you're seeing our prototype of our Cinema Snowglobe with fireworks.
And what we did was we
Fireworks show in the
had a custom engineered board designed by one of Scott's friends, actually, who's a board designer, with the electronics and the accelerometer and the power system that would do all of the tasks that we wanted a snow globe to do. And then one of the things about this piece is that even though it sounds sort of simple, what happens when you pick up a snow globe is the snow shakes up, you shake it, right? And the snow falls, and then after a while it settles down, and your scene is still again. So that's exactly the action that we wanted to program into our Cinema Snowglobe, that it's, you know, basically asleep until you pick it up, and when you shake it, that's when the short film starts playing, and it plays for about 20 seconds until it's still again, which is about the same time that snow would fall down. And then it literally goes to sleep. And then when you set it down on the table, it's asleep until the next time you shake it. And so it really scales in terms of its size, and it really acts like a regular snow globe. Then we made another version called a panorama snow globe, and Scott's going to explain this one.
Okay, so the current iteration of the Cinema Snowglobe is responsive to movement. So if I tilt it, it turns on. And then this is a scene that's actually a 360-degree panorama. So when I tilt the globe in one direction, it pans around the scene, and when I tilt it in the other direction, it pans back the other way. And if I set it down or if I hold still for too long, it will eventually go to sleep. Good night.
And we're now working on a second version of this where instead of a still panorama scene, we actually have 360-degree video. So when you tilt it and turn it, it's as if you're standing in the middle of a live time-based scene. These, the snow globes debuted at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art last May, and so you see people here are, you know, looking at them. And then we also have what we call our magic, our crystal ball, which is solid quartz rather than a liquid-filled globe, but has the same effect of through the lens of making a scene really feel virtual. So the piece, the body of work that I think wraps up most of my practice is material language. And that's because I had determined, as I noted earlier, that instead of painting, what I was really interested in was the language of particular materials, particular media, and telling a story and creating. And so, I'll show you. So what I decided to do was to actually combine my background in painting and representation through painting with photography, with time-based imagery, which included Super 8 film and high definition video. So what you're looking at is one very large surface. This piece is about 48 inches by 48 inches, and it's about 2.5 inches thick. And on the left-hand side, which doesn't record very well, it's blue because I'm recording video, is a 42-inch LCD screen that's turned on its side. But what it has is the Super 8 version film of the same spot as the bus goes by, along with an HD version. So we essentially were in one spot across the street, crammed together with a Super 8 camera, an HD camera, and a photographic, and a digital SLR. Taking a large format photograph of the scene, which I then painted. So on the far right, it's actually a painting. And then here you'll see, in a moment you'll see a still shot. There we go. So here you can kind of see the detail, where it goes from HD on the far left to Super 8 to large format photography to a painting. And it was really important for me that they all be on the same surface, and that they actually be the materials that they were. So the Super 8 film was filmed in Super 8, but so it wasn't a filter, it was actually Super 8 film, but then it was transferred to video. And this is a very, very thin veneer of wood, which was sealed with garbage glue and gessoed, and then painted with oil paint in the way that I was trained as a painter. And then that was mounted right next to the photograph, which were both mounted on plexiglass, which covered the whole surface. So this is kind of nice because this is a circle in terms of being a self-portrait that I was trying to do in terms of being creative with a self-portrait that I couldn't do very effectively or relevantly as a painting. So my son, who's now 11, at this time he would have been like 9 or 8, is in a lot of my work. And this is about 50 inches long and about 18 inches high. And on the far left is a painted version of my couch, and then a large format photograph, and then Super 8 film, and then HD video. And you can see that in detail. And so it really was about the nature of time and representation. This is my partner Scott, and on the far left is the painting. Again, this one is huge. This one's like 50 inches by 50 inches. And then what you can see, and what I'll do is I'll find this in the video as well, is when you're photographing this grinder with the sparks, the photograph captures it as this one orange blur. But when you see it in the Super 8 film, you actually see the sparks flying down because it's time-based and then disappear. And then the HD video has its own look and feel. So I'll find that in the actual video. That's also the San Francisco Art Institute. And there's me. My arm disappears. Let's see, I think Scott's up here. Yeah, here we go. So you can see the sparks coming down by his pants in a way that you can't really see when they're on the photograph. And then also he's able to walk away from the picture, and his head stays there because it's static. And then he also walks back. So here's detail of the city of San Francisco. And then this is going to be close to the last slide I have in terms of my work. Lim was inspired by the material language series, transferred to an iPad. So I think the experience of seeing something done in 4 different media was something that we wanted to share. You couldn't really experience it unless you were in front of those paintings, but at the same time the idea was interesting. So what we did was we created Lim, and I'll show you a video how it works.
Hi, we're here at the workshop residency looking at the latest application developed by me and Scott, and this is called LIMN, L-I-M-N. It's 4 panels that you're looking at, and they're done in 4 different mediums. From the left is a photograph, and then HD video, as you can see the moving image, and then Super 8 film, and then a painting. It's inspired by the material language series where I did all of these mediums as originals. With the iPad application, if you tilt it, you actually see that ribbon of that medium move across the surface of the iPad. And then if you want to explore one of the mediums anymore, you can move it with your finger, or you can actually widen that vertical ribbon with your finger to explore more of the Super 8 film, more of the painting version in the image, or more of the video or photograph. We are in the beta phase here, and we're now developing this to be available in about a month. And it will also feature 3 other images, which we've given the same treatment of depicting them in 4 different materials. So keep an eye out for the iTunes application LIM.
So I wanted to very, very quickly run through some of my public artworks. Downtown Mirror was one of the artworks that actually received an award as being one of the best public artworks in the country in 2009. It was commissioned by, and this again speaks to my background in film and telling a story. So you can see the similarities in terms of representation here in the portrait. So, especially like to the Magic Story Table. So here I actually collected portraits from people who were around the city, and I had them write the answer to 3 questions. The first question being, what made them happy, what made them afraid, and what were they thinking about right before I walked up to them. And then I also did a time lapse in the sense that I researched the answers to these same kind of psychogeographic questions in the archives of the San Jose Library. And then I set all of those as subtitles to be short films that played in 9 different places in the city of San Jose. So it was essentially their stories reflected back to them through these storefront installations. And then part of that was also this airplanes, because if you've ever gone to San Jose, they're right in the flight path to the airport, and so there's this roar of airplanes that comes right over you. And what we wanted to do is sort of mimic that back, and again, mirror that back. So this is about 40 feet long, or 35 feet long, and about 16 feet high. And one of the issues, of course, is sound, because sound is such a huge part of that experience. So we actually, you can't really see it, but we actually have a directional speaker that forms a sound corridor 8 feet wide, so that when you walk along the sidewalk, you actually hear the roar of the airplanes as you're watching that video. But if you were to stand 5 feet over in the parking lot, you wouldn't hear it. So it came as this nice surprise that you encountered when you walked down this alley. And then you saw this film. And then Portal, and I was just talking about this with Chris before and Nicholas before the lecture started. The children, the city of San Jose discovered a 10,000-year-old mountain fossil in downtown San Jose, and they asked me to make a film that would be projected as a public art piece that would start to talk about the story again of San Jose as a prehistoric site. And so that's what Portal is. And so you saw that image that was on the poster, and it was at one of the major intersections in San Jose. And it was projected there for a year and a half. And what it was, there was also some informational material on a nearby plaque, as well as the code. And here's an example of the film, because again, this was actually a real challenge. How do you tell the story that a certain place basically is prehistoric? So I went back to the origins of, our planets and our solar system, and put in the sun, and then how we measured time. And so, and this is what you're looking at now is the projection that was on that building. And we used to measure time with a sundial, and then an analog version, and so it speaks to the metaphors of time being collapsed. And then we have these digital clocks. And now most of the days, we measure our time with what? With our cell phones. And what you're looking at with those palm trees is actually the Children's Discovery Museum, which was a partner in commissioning this piece. And then here I have the time go backwards, and in order to tell the story of time passing, I included these very short snippets of instances, which you'll see here in a moment, that referenced the collapse of time and how things change. So San Jose actually used to be it actually used to be a large lake. So here I have a picture of a lake that's been filling up and then draining to become basically the Valley of San Jose. And then if any of you have been in Northern California, one of the main thoroughfares is the 101 freeway. So that was the site of the old freeway, had a dirt road that then becomes a major thoroughfare. And then this speaks to, how we saw flight before historic times versus now. And then, the major part of thinking about time, and that's actually a cave painting of a mammoth, which is the kinds of bones that they had, that they found in downtown Tennessee. And this was in Tibet. And so I decided to basically, over time, show how the eye has been depicted by humans. From King Tut to Buddha, to Michelangelo's David, to the mosque paintings, to classical paintings, and here you see an Aang, you see a Vermeer eye, and these are actually in chronological order. You see a Van Gogh eye here. And then, of course, we have photography. And then from photography we go into film, and that's an eye theater bar with silent film star to the present eye, and then I snuck in a cat eye in here. But essentially, this rotates back, it's about a 3-minute loop, and then the eyeball turns into the earth again, and then starts to loop over. And then the last slide here is about my work with the Arts Commission. In 2009, I was appointed by then Mayor Gavin Newsom to the Arts Commission, and then in 2011, I was appointed president of the Arts Commission. So I now am very honored and excited to be overseeing all public art that's commissioned in the city of San Francisco, which is about a $12–18 million budget, and includes commissioning artworks from people such as Roxy Payne and Tim Hawkinson and Ned Kahn, who's an amazing technological artist, Jorge Pardo. But one of my jobs now is to actually meet these artists and talk about their artworks and how they can augment the city of San Francisco. And part of that was also authoring a public master plan for the gallery district in San Francisco. And that's my website. And I'm going to end with one other sort of thing that hopefully will make you laugh on this very dire and sad day. And that is my talking about how art and life are rarely separated. So this is my son as a waffle. I should actually show the website first, so let me show that first. So ever since he was one, my son has always gone as his favorite thing. And one of the great things about being an artist is I can make him into his favorite thing. So when he loved eating bananas, so he was a Chiquita banana. It's actually a 2-part costume. The banana peel actually zips off, and then he's a banana underneath. So and then when he was 2, he loved talking to safety companies. So he would actually be driving, and he would ask me to pull over so we could have a conversation. And so he was a safety cone. And then when he was 3, he loved ketchup on everything. And so even his pancakes, so he went as a ketchup model. And then when he was 4, of course, every kid loved ice cream. And he wanted to make sure that all of his favorite flavors were there, of course. So that's mango, that's mint, and that's strawberry. And these costumes are 6-month projects. So we actually start conceptualizing them in July, and we have to make sure that they're both lightweight, for a 30 or 40-pound child to wear, and walk around for an hour and a half to collect candy. So he has to have his arms free, and so and also that that he would have fun wearing them, and he does. And so the ice, that's just a wraparound suit that has big seam of Velcro in the back. And the cone is actually a set of overalls that he wears that also has Velcro in the back. And then the scoops of ice cream are an actual headpiece that are formed with household spray foam, carefully made around a bicycle helmet that we then carve a hole in. And then we painted them, of course, to be accurately colored for his flavors. I was talking about making spaghetti and how we make spaghetti. You know, that's part of your work as an artist. So he actually loves spaghetti and meatballs. So we used the same technique to do his helmet and to, instead of making ice cream, make a meatball. And again, this was thinking about what are the materials and how can I make them do what I want them to do. So that's household tube installation made of foam. We dipped that into a silicone plastic, and then I hand covered the noodles with red paint so it would actually look like stained spaghetti sauce on the noodles. And then the fork is foam that's cut out with an armature. That it's a three-piece costume, so he's wearing the basket noodles, the headpiece, and then we stick the fork on top of the frog. And this is actually a sandwich. It's actually pretty funny. It's got Velcro on both sides, and it comes apart like two halves of a sandwich, and then you just Velcro it together. And as artists, you would appreciate this. The way that we got the bread is 3-inch foam was I actually took a piece of bread. And this is why it's important for you all to learn like Photoshop and Illustrator and After Effects. And I separated the colors of the toasted bread in Photoshop to make a 3-part stencil, which we then laser cut and placed on the cut piece of bread to spray it in the exact 3 shades of that bread to make it look like real bread. And we did the same thing with salami. We found a wax-coated fabric that they use for like picnic tables, so it would have that waxy, oily surface that salami had. And we again did a stencil going into Photoshop, taking the magic wand and choosing all the similar colors and making a 3-part stencil for the salami. So we had to have a cop eating a donut. And whenever we do Halloween, we actually are very near the cashier, so we always stop the cashier afterwards and get pizza, which is really fun. There's nothing like a donut going in for eating pizza. And many times we've actually gotten free pizza because they love the pizza proprietors love our pizza. And so he was a rainbow sprinkled chocolate-covered donut. Tricky thing was, how are we going to get the hole right through him? Now, I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually a plexi-cut mirror that kind of like reflects out, so it actually looks like a hole. So he doesn't look solid. And what I did was I took a picture of a real donut and then figured out what the shape of that hole was, and then had that scaled up and cut the mirror plexi, and then sewed it on. And then we took an actual popcorn box to do the pattern for the popcorn, and again, it's a headpiece along with. So this we actually, here we know, okay, what do you want your material to do? This is a really great example. We want our material to look like real cotton candy. And we actually found what's called batting, which is what people spin into yarn. And we got the exact color pink. And then we built a wire shell armature that we covered with a very thin fabric that we would sew on this swirl of this batting in a circular way. And then, cotton candy has that kind of weird Chinese sugary texture to it, so we actually just took shellac paint. And it was perfect because it beat it up on the surface of the fibers, and it also made the costume waterproof. It had shellac on it. And for the cone, again, it has an armature that comes out of the top of that we stick the cone on, which is in Tyvek, because we wanted it to look like real paper. So we actually wrapped a foam core with Tyvek. And on these are actually from my website, so if you wanted to look at them. And so I haven't had a chance to put on the last 2 years' costumes, so I'm going to show them to you here. So last year, he says, Mom, I was cotton candy, this year we have to go savory. So we decided to go with waffles, and that was Sebastian's idea. And so as you can see, there's a roll pat of butter, and there's the syrup dripping down. We always go as a companion costume, and so we were the waffle bakers. And that's his grandmother, that I have my arm around, and that's Scott. Here's me putting on the costume. Here's Scott testing. So please do what you wanted to do. These costumes all have to navigate stairs to go upstairs and be low enough so he doesn't hit the top of the doorways. He has to be able to relax in them if he wants to take a break. Again, now every year we do a portrait with a policeman. And this shows you some of the process. So again, foam is a huge part of these Halloween costumes because it's lightweight and can be malleable and carved. And so what we did was that's Sophie, spray painted it to look, and basically we worked with photographs so that they're true to the color. And then the actual syrup was urethane, was liquid, liquid silicone. So we actually go to the local sculpture supply store a lot, and we tested all these different substances. This was pourable, basically silicone rubber. And in case you're wondering about the drips, and that was Scott's idea, the drips were made from pouring that liquid into condoms. So we're actually and that would have a nice fold over the table so it could be dripping off. You can see our rectangles right here. This is this year. So this year he was mac and cheese. That's Scott as Susie Homemaker. And again, we worked with, those are foam swim noodles. So, if anyone, and the funny thing is you'll see some of these process photos, and again, we went back with the fork. So here we are actually covering my living room because we ran out of studio space with the foam noodles. And Scott, being the engineer that he is, figured out an ingenious way of curling those noodles, which are normally straight, by inserting a big plastic fiberglass insulated tube, or fiberglass strengthened tube, and then shooting a heat gun through. So it gave just enough heat to curl the noodle, but not enough to melt it. And that's why he was able to get those nice curls. And then what he's doing now is he's actually measuring on a scale, you can see that scale, the mixture of this special paint that we're going to use to dip it in to be the maximum color. And so here we have our proportions down on that red notebook of exactly how much sort of fixative and color pigment that we put in. Here's our needle factory. And you can see our dipping pans, and we had to have these drying racks. Of course, you have to use the real thing, right, to make sure that your color is right. So if you got to eat whatever was left. The fork, again, was a larger version of the earlier one, but it's stretched silver fabric. And he inserted a wire armature in the center, which is what made it stiff. And here he is sort of testing the headpiece, because it's again a three-piece costume, on Sebastian. And that's a vest, so he actually structured this fork armature in the back that tucked into this vest, and that's what held the fork up. And then we sprayed that vest to color match the noodles. Here we are starting to stitch the noodles onto the actual vest while we're watching the World Series. Go Giants! Yay, Giants won. He's doing a final fitting here to make sure all the noodles are securely attached. And then here is the whole thing getting with a giant colander with the noodles as a prop. Here's the back, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't make a fork sticking into a set of noodles. We ran into the Wizard of Oz. And that's it. I'm happy to take any questions. We're done?
What's next for your son's costume?
Oh, yeah, everybody, now that, all my students ask me the same thing. So what happens is usually in July or so, I start raising the question, like, okay, what do you want to do? And he's getting a little older, so he's getting a little more inventive, and I think it's a compliment, but he thinks Scott and I can do anything. So like once he said, I want to be an escalator. And we said, what do you know about an escalator? Because if it's really going to work, you know, we have to get out the middle and I said, go up. And you know, we don't say no, we just start to try to figure out actually the way that we can accommodate him. And some things, you know, are a little more reasonable than others, of course. Are there any other questions?
Of course I have a question.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the beginning where you're kind of breaking out a process. And one of the things that struck me was the idea of relevance. And I think a lot of artists, a lot of people have a hard time sussing out a good idea from a bad idea. How do you navigate that kind of process for relevance?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you asked that question. I find that one of the most common things I see in sort of emerging artists or artists who are just starting to make their own body of work and create their own sort of signature or aesthetic is, I've actually heard some artists say, I don't know if it's good enough. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, in the sense that meaning good, meaning interesting, relevant, different, novel. And I think part of the test is just putting it out there and seeing how people react. I mean, there's nothing more sort of humbling than making something that you're super excited about, putting it out in the world, and nobody pays attention. And nobody thinks it's interesting. Or people just, you know, like your friends say, oh yeah, that's nice. Or your wife says, yeah, that's nice. But you know, there really isn't that engagement and that reaction. And then the other thing that I do, and I will do it as long as I live, as long as I'm an artist, is I constantly go through that process of deconstructing what those questions are and how they're answered in other people's work. So I'll go to a museum and I'll see a piece that really wows me. And I'll say, now, why does it wow me? What is it that this artist did that's sort of different? Or what strategies did that artist take in terms of, was it this unexpected use of this material? Was it because this material really, you know, was appropriate for this kind of a concept? And I try to build my own sort of skill in looking at that. And that helps me start in my brainstorming process. And sometimes, you know, I have found actually sometimes the best way of assessing that is showing your work to your close friends and to your peers and saying, what do you think? And getting their honest feedback. And that's what you're doing now. You're building that community, which is really going to become important in the future. Yeah.
I'm really enamored with the material language series and the LIM app, and I'm curious if you're going to keep exploring moving between media and materials and
Oh,
applying some of the
absolutely.
ideas you might have there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that question up because at my core, that's what my work is really about. It's about kind of like
You
really.
picked the right one to love.
Yes, you did. Digging deep in terms of how a material works as something that creates meaning or something that creates experience. So my big project ahead is actually to do a similar thing, but as material language, but with a book. So, and it's something I've been working on and thinking about for a long time. So, you know, I mean, Kindle has the Mimic book where it kind of looks like a book and you go like that and turn the page.
It's that IKEA catalog.
Right, exactly. But what I would like to do is actually see if, and I know it's going to take, it's getting closer and closer, but it's still not there, is to actually make that seamless in the sense to combine literature, storytelling, actual sort of text-based storytelling with the moving image and with the physical feel of a book And what's really interesting is nowadays they're actually making like thin paper thin LCD screens, which, you know, in the future they'll be thin enough that they will be kind of like pages of a book, and we'll be able to, you know, be capable of feeling someone like a book. And so that's one idea. The other idea is just to work with something that's more screen-based, but to integrate sort of film in the sense that, so one of, you know, my ideas is that you would read a book like a Kindle, but there would be some kind of marker or creation of like a particular word. Maybe 3 or 4 words in the story that you're reading are slightly lighter black or gray. And that would be a cue that there's something there. So that if you like pressed on that, then all of the letters would dissolve into or morph into a short film that was about that sentence. You know? And so it essentially started to combine the material of the moving image and the material film as a storytelling medium with text. Yeah.
I'm curious about what your experience was revisiting painting
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and bringing it back into work alongside your works in the media.
Thanks for asking about that. In that material language series, that was my favorite part of that series, was sitting in front of an easel. I mean, this sounds kind of funny, but I think because my practice, as you can see, has become so sort of screen moving image based, and, you know, Final Cut Pro and After Effects and Photoshop, and, you know, that to return to painting was so refreshing, where it's about sort of like, you know, dipping your brush, mixing the right color, you know, putting on a glaze, you know, scraping off stuff, and it was so physical. I mean, it's such a physical analog medium compared to all this virtual stuff. That was my favorite part, and it's very meditative. I find painting to be very, you know, really sort of calming and satisfying. So, and it was great because, you know, I hadn't painted in a while when I did that series. So that series took me about a year between 2009 and 2010. And I think the last time I had painted, you know, actually done a painting was probably 3 or 4 years earlier. So that was nice. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Your lecture started off with a lot of great advice for artists who are thinking about concepts and what their work's about. Could you talk a little bit about the economy of being an artist, especially in San Francisco?
Oh, yeah.
San Francisco is under such extreme type of gentrification.
Yeah.
The cost of living is almost the highest
It is.
in North America.
It is.
What type of advice do you have for your students in the Bay Area?
So, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because I think it's, particularly if you are thinking about pursuing a serious career as an artist, it's something that all of you have to think about in terms of, can I make this sustainable? The most successful artists I've seen, and of course it's not your definition of success, but to me, a successful artist is one who is able to make the art they want to make and pay for it, for the materials, and ideally show in the places they want to show, and have that a big part of their life, and sustain that career as a big part of their life. I'm not, you know, ideally it would be full-time, but that's few and far between. The presence of all of those people you see on the cover of the art magazines, those are like the 1/10 of the 1% of the artists who are actually able to make a full-time living as an artist. And in fact, many of them, the reason that they're able to do that is because they teach. So they become like the me or the Christopher or the Nathaniel or the you, who are able to sustain their art practices at the same time, you know, being able to pay their rent and get their health benefits through regular employment. And to me, that's the ideal career, is actually teaching, because I find that teaching really is enriching for me, and it keeps me sort of up to date on the latest technology and in the art world and what people are thinking about and making. But but teaching jobs are also few and far between, and they're very competitive. So my second piece of advice, beyond, you know, looking for a possible teaching career in order to sustain work, is to choose some sort of skill that informs your work that you can continue to build on a commercial side. So the fact that I think a lot of you are doing digital practice is incredibly valuable. So many of my filmmaker friends They sort of produce or edit film on a commercial level, or they produce short videos for, for corporations or companies, which sustains their independent film. So many of my photographer artist friends that I know and graduates have a commercial side of their photography as well as a fine art side. So many of the people who do, who are not necessarily photographers but know Photoshop, do editing, or are able to use those visual tools, or do web design, and then that sort of practice sustains practice. One of the things I would advise, though, if you're pursuing that route, is to not try as much as possible to not do a full-time job, because it's going to burn you out. So see if you could possibly work a 4-day work week. So you would at least have, a day free to devote to your artwork. Otherwise, I've seen so many artists go into a full-time job and then not make art again, because they just don't have the energy or feel like they don't have the time to act for the space, both mentally as well as in their time management, to devote to their art practice. And as far as cost of living in San Francisco, a lot of my artist friends, unfortunately, are having to move to LA or move across the bay to Oakland. I'm not sure how artists are going to be able to make it into just because of what's going on now with the lack of rent-controlled apartments that are available in housing. And if that happens, a lot of my friends have actually just moved. If they really are serious about sustaining their career, there's a trade-off in terms of being able to live where you want to live, but also being able to afford it. So I feel very lucky that I'm able to do that. Are there any other questions?
In a world where we can replace analog experiences like a snow globe with a digital experience, just like a tablet program, where you can recover those images, what do you think the need is to maintain an analog interface for those experiences? Why do we do it?
Think about, I guess my response to that is think about going into your living room and seeing a snow globe of, what's your favorite place in the world? What's your favorite place in the world?
Favorite place in the world?
Yeah. Geographic location.
National Park.
Okay. Even though it's probably the cheesiest little snow globe with the Sequoia Mountains and maybe a little buffalo at the bottom, to be able to sort of look at that as an object and it's sitting on your bookcase is going to be a very different, even if you don't even pick it up, it's going to be a very different experience than seeing a digital image of it on an iPad. Or, there is something to be said about the physical, about the object, that is never going to be the same as the digital. And I think that's why. And I think that's why we've had such a great response to the snow globe, even though it uses digital imagery, is because it's an object that's tactile, that people can look up close and put down and pick up and play with. And that's so different than the digital experience. The digital experience is very sort of flat screen-based, very, essentially kind of one-dimensional compared to the object. Is there a question back there? Yeah.
Okay. In the beginning you said be smart.
Oh yeah.
And in parentheses, don't be stupid. So I'm just wondering how you mean by don't be stupid.
Well, I know I said it sort of abstractly, but I think one of the things that I've seen younger artists do is to not think through sort of the consequences of their actions. I've seen this happen a lot. That's what I mean by don't be stupid. In the sense that when you're in the decision-making process, whether it's like choosing a particular paint that you're going to use, but it's really, really expensive, and if you run out, you're not going to be able to afford to paint the whole thing, to something like, to me, and this is sort of like the be smart, don't be stupid, the prime example. One of my favorite former students, who's now actually a really respected curator, when he was in graduate school, he decided to do this performance performance, because he was talking about, because he was really interested in the sort of authority and police action. And so, as a test, he wanted to see what if he put like a fake Molotov cocktail inside a bus shelter. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty stupid, right? But he just kind of wanted to see how are people going to react, and without thinking through what might happen. And so what happened was that he actually sort of like went to the bus shelter and replaced the fire extinguisher that was in the bus shelter in that glass case with what looked like essentially a Molotov cocktail. It was fake, just a bottle with a cloth hanging out of the mouth, but it looked like one. And someone, sure enough, and he did this when no one was looking, and then he just kind of like was waiting to hear if anything happened. Well, they shut down the entire Civic Center in San Francisco. The entire opera performance that night was canceled because of a bomb threat. And they tracked down the materials that were in that Molotov cocktail sort of case that replaced it to his credit card. Another stupid thing was that he bought something that had a price tag from a store that was local that could be tracked down in terms of when. So the police investigated who bought this stuff. And they tracked it down to him, and he was prosecuted. He would have had a felony if he hadn't had a good lawyer. But instead he got community service. But yeah, that's but that's because he didn't think through. Maybe this is a cool new genre's performance idea. But, just maybe there are some other things that might happen that I'm not predicting here and not thinking about. And those are two very extreme ends of the continuum in terms of what kind of materials you buy and make sure that you can afford them versus this thing that gets you arrested and a mark on your criminal record. But I think that when I say be smart, it's about if you're going to engage in a set of decision-making strategies about your art, is to really think them through in terms of if they make sense, both in terms of what you're doing, even if it's a sculpture you're making. I've seen so many students also make a sculpture where they kind of threw out the laws of physics and hurt themselves, because they didn't sort of think ahead that maybe that thing's going to be too heavy and it's going to fall on my foot or someone else's foot or that sort of thing. So that's.
So even before you go about your whole process of making something, where do you find your inspiration for these interesting and different kinds of ideas that you come up with?
So I find a lot of my inspiration from other artists. I actually am most inspired. I've found over the years that one of the most inspiring things for me to do is sit in the back of a room, and just like you were sitting here, in a dark auditorium with some other artist flashing their slides up on the screen. And I'm not saying I'm going to be inspired by that artist, but I'm going to be inspired by watching another artist's process and thinking, and then applying that to my own thinking. And I've had so many ideas sitting in darkened lecture halls looking at someone else's work. And then the other thing I do is see a lot of art. I go to other art shows, I go to museums, I watch a lot of films, and am constantly sort of noting down either in a notebook or even applying to a current piece of work that I'm making, the kinds of sort of strategies and effects and ideas that I see in other people's work. And then the last thing I do, and I know this is going to sound really specific, but I actually do it and it really works, is there's this great quarterly publication called Nurse's Archive. And what it is it's a quarterly journal made in Germany of all of the best advertising internationally, worldwide. And so these are basically artists who are commissioned to make ad campaigns and films for some of the top companies all over, and particularly in Europe, who are just brilliant. And I actually go and flip through a literature archive. I subscribe to it. It's expensive. It's like, $100 a year for 4 issues. But to me, it's like one of my biggest reference points. Is flipping through and seeing how other artists are thinking, or how they solve problems, or how they're working with sculpture. Because the kind of quality that comes out of that, and I do that more than Art America or Art Forum. I just think it's so much more interesting to seeing what the commercial world is producing in the realm of art, in the advertising world. But I see so much creative, brilliant thinking in that. That's my comment. I encourage you to check it out. Literature Archive. It's LUERZER. Any other questions? Oh, one more.
Earlier talking about sort of the emotion of these students or emerging artists when they're confronted with the discovery, either that their work may be copying someone else's, or I think even, maybe being copied by someone else. And I too find the concept of owning ideas to be really problematic. I noticed there were some similarities between your Secrets project and Frank Warren's Post Secret. I was wondering if you could just sort of expound a little bit on how do you, a little bit of like the story of how that played out. I noticed sort of the timelines were similar, and just how do you learn, from other artists in that situation, or how do you sort of play off of that? And then finally, I was just curious if you share or sell any of your inventions.
Yeah, okay, so quick answer to the very last question is yes. And in fact, the Cinema Snowglobe, we started having private commissions of them, but because we're still making them by hand, we can't, we actually have a waiting list of over 200 people. And we've had commissions from MoMA, from the Exploratorium. So we've actually produced a couple hundred of those globes, but each one is by hand. And now we just got a recent residency to sort of upscale and be able to get the tools to mass produce them. And so we really do aim to have them sort of out as a more sort of mass-produced commercial product. I have not heard that Post-Secret comment in a long time, because the Secrets project was over 10 years ago. And what's interesting is that someone told me about that, and I looked it up, and it turns out that I had, and you can actually look this up on my website, I had started collecting my secrets a year before he did his project. So I actually, and I don't know if he ever saw my project, but I think the most important thing about that is I don't care. I mean, I don't care if he copied my project or saw my project, or even if I did it after him. I know that I was doing it independently, and I was also doing it differently. Because he ended up collecting these secrets through these postcards, and then making them into several series of books. I ended up making these secrets into subtitles of these films, and then installing them in cafe tables. I mean, that's two really different, they're the same idea, but they create two completely different experiences. And he also said he's not an artist. He really was just sort of into this sociological experiment about who would send him secrets. But one of the funniest things about that whole project was that I learned years afterwards that one of the early conceptual artists, I think it was, I don't know if it was Martha Rosler, but it was another female artist, had done a similar Secrets project in the 70s. So those ideas are out there. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try them. Because as an artist, I think all of us is capable of thinking about, as I put in my notes, a different and possibly even better way of, basically of fleshing out the